beautiful.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
Morning, sir. Jeff, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. He would have come straight at Oxford his first command.
Come on.
Remember the queue store was down on the bottom, the drawing room was up top.
So we had about 60 because what happens is the guy goes out to the field and he calls in artillery strikes. Absolutely. Oh, excellent.
And it's called the Torhardy River.
Yeah.
Airway tower at present, so yeah, I'm still there.
Members of the survey corps, but they haven't served overseas.
Started off with Spider-Man 92. We got Cam.
But it's actually good time from the regiment perspective. We only sundial.
This is a decent umbrella.
Yes, too.
Well, good morning, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, to today's recognition ceremony. My name is Captain Wayne Gardner. I'm the MC for this occasion, which I'm very pleased about and to be here. I'm the Assistant Manager at the Army Museum of Western Australia. So the welcome is also to historic Artillery Barracks and to our fine museum here. I'm going to go through a couple of little formalities and then I'll end up with a little bit of housekeeping to reassure you as well. First of all, I just want to have our acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Wadjak people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I would also like to pay my respects to the Indigenous men and women who have contributed to the defence of Australia in times of peace and war. So we're here today, an important and significant occasion in the history of the Royal Australian Survey Corps, to recognise the service of 9 Western Australian connected members of the Royal Australian Survey Corps who died while serving in the Australian Defence Force. Our special guest today is Senator, the Honourable Dean Smith, representing the Senator, the Honourable Maurice Payne, the Minister for Defence, Brigadier Retired Duncan Warren, AMRFD, former Commander of 13 Brigade, and Mrs Lisbeth Warren, welcome. Mr Joss Wilson MP, Federal Member for Fremantle. Councillor Hannah Fitzharding representing Dr Brad Pitt, the Mayor of Fremantle. Mr John McCourt, Chief Executive Officer of the RSLWA. Mr James McMahon, DSC, DSM representing Mr Kerry Stokes, AC of Australian Capital Equity. Mr Graham Smith representing the Australian Army Museum of Western Australia. And we have also an apology today from Dr Brendan Nelson AO, the esteemed Director of the Australian War Memorial, who nevertheless sends his kind regards and expresses himself by saying he wishes us very well with a successful ceremony. He's also provided us with some words, and those that know Dr Nelson is quite a wordsmith, so I'm sure you'll enjoy the words he has to say, which are very relevant to this occasion. You wouldn't go anywhere without the engineers. Those guys are truly special, real lifesavers. These words are the words of an Australian soldier speaking of his war in Afghanistan as told to the Australian War Memorial. Yet you've always been there. Members of the Survey Corps served with immense skill and courage at Gallipoli and beyond, as they do today as engineers. We all remember and reflect upon those killed in action. Their names are listed on honour boards and rolls. But those killed in training who die whilst in service are strangers beyond the families who love them and the men and women who they served with. It is tempting, human beings that we are, to settle for headlines and broad brushstrokes on our history, for popular imagery and mythology. Our comfortable lives breed easy indifference to individual sacrifices made in our name, devotion to duty and to our country. Each one of these 9 men, Western Australian members of the Survey Corps and Royal Australian Engineers, so honoured here today and always, like us, had only one life. They chose to dedicate their lives to us and our nation. Today, with awkward humility, we recognise that dedication and legacy of service to others. Neither our military nor our nation would have gone anywhere without them. They are honoured and remembered. And we should remember with your Corps, we talk about the teeth a lot in our history, but the teeth wouldn't be the teeth without the tail. And that's what you guys do, and men and women. So they're honoured and remembered. Dr. Brendan Nelson, AO, Director, Australian War Memorial. So we welcome the family members of those who served is being recognised today as well, their service, and former Army colleagues and friends. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker today, the Senator Honourable Dean Smith, representing Senator the Honourable Maurice Payne, Minister of Defence.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here this morning representing the Federal Minister for Defence, my Senate colleague, Senator the Honourable Maurice Payne, at what is a very, very significant event. Significant also because, of course, we mark today's occasion as a precursor, if you like, to the week-long commemorative events around this Anzac Day in 2018. But of course, this year, 2018, is very important because it's part of our efforts to mark the 100th anniversary of the armistice in 1918, which led to the shaping of not just modern Europe, but of course to the modern world. So I'm delighted to be here at this recognition ceremony at what is a most remarkable Army Museum, an Army Museum that as West Australians we can be particularly proud of in our home state. And of course we honour today 9 men who died serving in the Australian Defence Forces, who lost their lives either having joined the Survey Corps in Western Australia or served in Western Australia while in the Survey Corps. We all know that the Australian Defence Force has a rich history of service to our nation. Remembering and honouring the contribution and efforts of all Australian Defence Force members, past and present, to Australia and to the whole community is an important way to recognise the legacy of those who've served. We should remind ourselves that today there are approximately 2,300 Australian Defence Force members deployed on operations serving Australia's national interest abroad. These servicemen and women are tirelessly working in operations both in Australia but importantly far from their families and their friends in service across the globe. They are participating as part of the US-led global coalition effort to combat Daesh and its terrorist threat across Iraq and Syria. They are supporting the NATO-led Train, Advise and Assist Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. They are supporting counter-piracy and counter-terrorism in the Middle East maritime environment, and they're contributing to various United Nations missions, and of course assisting and enhancing security and stability in our own region, in domestic security roles, supporting Australia's maritime domain and maritime security operations across the Middle East region. In my early years as a parliamentary representative from Western Australia, I had the opportunity to go and see for myself the service and professionalism and dedication of young Australian servicemen and women in the Middle East. With other parliamentarians, I participated on what's called the Australian Defence Force Parliamentary Program that took us to the Middle East, that took us to the United Arab Emirates, that saw us fly with Air Force personnel across Iran and Pakistan into Afghanistan. And I saw firsthand that tremendous sense of duty and professionalism that young men and young women have serving our country abroad. And it was a very, very sobering assessment as a parliamentarian to be reminded that the things that toil our minds, the complexity of the issues that we might have to confront in our very, very comfortable existence in Parliament compares nil to the great sacrifice that those young men and women make in service in a war-torn country like Afghanistan. But importantly, events such as today's recognition ceremony, in addition to other solemn commemorative events, provide all Australians with an opportunity to remember and reflect upon the service and sacrifice of our past and current servicemen and women, and to honour more than 102,000 who have given their lives in service of our nation. We know, of course, that Defence is a large and diverse organisation comprised of thousands of individuals working across a vast range of sectors, including security, intelligence, the sciences, manufacturing, strategy, innovation and policy, all working towards the common goal of defending Australia and its national interest, a home and abroad. So, of course, in today's ceremony, where we honour the unique and remarkable service of 9 men, we do so to also acknowledge and recognise the service of all men and women in the Australian Defence Force personnel, past and present. But of course, today is about those 9 men and the families and friends of those 9 men. I understand personally how traumatic, how difficult it can be to lose the life of someone in your family through service in the Australian Defence Force. Although unknown to me, the story of my father's eldest brother, Private Anthony Frank Smith, has left a very, very impressionable mark on our family. Private Anthony Frank Smith served in the SAS regiment in the late 1950s, shortly after the time of its formation, and lost his life in 1960 in a platoon exercise in the Avon Valley in Western Australia. His name is now the first name on the rock at Swanbourne Barracks. And even though he is unknown to me, to take Brendan Nelson's words, a stranger to me, the image, the legacy, the history of his service has not only informed and powered my commitment to public service, but it propelled my father to join the Army and serve in Vietnam, and my father's youngest brother to join the Army and serve in Vietnam as well. So when Brendan Nelson talks about strangers beyond their families, our job is to make sure that men like those we honour today don't become strangers in their own families. And by honouring them, we honour their service, we honour our commitment to civil and public service, but importantly, we acknowledge past, present and future men and women of the Australian Defence Force. It's a great honour. It's a great honour to be representing the Minister for Defence, but it's a great personal honour here to be showing my personal commitment, my support to those families that have lost their loved ones over the course of many, many years in the service of our great nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Senator, and sharing part of your family's military history, which is very sound. Thank you. Our next speaker, and there are 3 to reassure you, we're not going to be here all day, is the Brigadier Duncan Warren, AMRFD, former Commander of 13 Brigade. Sir.
Thank you, Wayne. Mr. Fred Brown, President of the Royal Australian Survey Corps Association of WA. Distinguished guests and members and friends of the Royal Australian Survey Corps. RA Survey was a very small corps and not one that I've ever had very much to do with. They were sort of co-located in what was 13 Brigade's headquarters building, or in the building next door, but obviously were not commanded at all by the brigade. So I've had to do a little bit of research and dragging a little bit of information out of various people's heads. But one thing that was quite clear is that we were always very cognizant of the fact that the maps that we used when we were on operations were vital to doing our tasks. I was just thinking, quickly mentioned in Welcome to Country about remembering the Aboriginal soldiers who were involved, and I happen to be, for my sins, the patron of the 2nd 28th Battalion Association. And old JJ Wade, who you'll hopefully see, unfortunately, this year in a wheelchair for the first time on Anzac Day, he's now 100 years old, recounted the story of in Tobruk, and some shells started coming over from the Germans, and the Aboriginal, who was part of the 2nd 28th Battalion, and this other bloke, it wasn't JJ, but JJ tells the story, they raced for their slit trench, scrambled in, there was dust and pebbles coming down, and they hunkered down in there, and the Aboriginal bloke asked his mate, he said, geez, no, the bloke asked the Aboriginal one, he said, geez, are you scared? And he said, yeah, but not as scared as you. And he says, well, how do you work that one out? He says, well, I haven't turned white yet. The mapping duties that have been done by RA Survey, as I say, have been pivotal in what has occurred throughout the time. The Survey Corps came into being 1st of July 1915. Their motto is to see is to prepare. I won't try and pronounce the Latin version because I was not bright enough at school to go to the Latin class. The Corps March I love, Wandering the King's Highway. But I suspect, having talked to some of these people, it's not quite as easy as it might sound from that particular title. And I think in World War II in particular it came into its own, and it produced more than 1,440 new maps in the theatres of war. In the Middle East there were 28, Australian mainland 708, New Guinea 364 maps, Borneo 147, Mindanao 200, and they printed more than 3 million copies of these maps. The highly valued efforts of the Corps did not go unnoticed by senior commanders. Lieutenant General Herring, GOC New Guinea Force, and Lieutenant General Northcote, the Chief of the General Staff, wrote letters of appreciation for the work of the Corps to the Director of Survey, Advanced Land Headquarters, and General MacArthur, Commander-in-Chief Southwest Pacific Area, wrote a letter of high commendation to the Corps for the Corps work to General Blamey, who was the Commander Allied Land Forces, Southwest Pacific Area. Maps are extremely important from my experience in the jungle areas in Vietnam. And for those who are not all that familiar with it, once you get into the jungle, it's a matter of navigating by compass bearings and counting paces. So the map is key to what you're doing. And I remember at one stage in Vietnam, we'd started an operation in Hammersley in February in 1970. We started off on the western side of the province in the Long High Hills. I ended up with a little sojourn in hospital and didn't get back out to the company, and they were across right over on the eastern side of the province in Xuan Moc. And we were supposed to find, or looking for, a particular camp that would be reported in the area. We couldn't find it, and the exercise, or the operation finished, and we were being pulled out. I was leading the company out with our platoon. We went for 1,000 metres. We should have hit the road, which was the pickup point for the helicopters. The boss told us to go another 1,000 metres. We still hadn't hit the road. And that means stopping and firing what they call a marked mission, with firing artillery at 3 points, map references that you know of, and then you listen to where those shells land, you take a back bearing from those, and that'll give you a little triangle of error, which is where you are. And the company had been out for more than 2,000 metres, probably for over a week. And if you've got to call in artillery and you're 2,000 metres away from where you think you are, it can be a dire situation. And I think it's particularly sad, and I don't know that this was the reason for it, but Warrant Officer Jack Kirby was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal. He was CSM, Company Sergeant Major of Delta Company 6 RAR in the Battle of Long Tan, and many people believe he should have received the Victoria Cross for what he did there. But 6 months later, he was killed by our own artillery. New Zealand, I will mention, just in case you think it could have been the Australians. And that was a very sad loss. Whether that was a result of errors in navigation or errors at the gunpoint, I'm not sure. In Vietnam, we didn't have a lot to do, obviously, with Survey Corps, but there's a book by John Bullen, who was the OC of the Topographical Survey Troop in South Vietnam, and they're just a little bit I'd like to read, because to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that sort of occurred. Where you think if you're making maps and you're involved in that side of things, maybe it's not so dangerous, but you never know what's going to happen. And in his diary, it's Thursday, the 11th of April, 1968. An interesting situation occurred this morning. We were sending a field survey team out to the village of Ap Sui Nay, just to the north of us. We've been told that we would have the assistance of a bulldozer for clearing from the engineers, a section of infantry protection, and transport, all to be at our office by 0800. We were ready by 0845. The infantry arrived at 0800, but no sign of the bulldozer or transport. Repeated phone calls, plenty of apologies and promises, but no result for about an hour and a half. The surveyors fidgeted continuously and displayed some annoyance at the delay, but the infantry just sat down and waited, obviously used to such mismanagement. I take issue with him there. Perfectly happy, they sat and read books, ready in pocket for such an emergency, or slept, or cleaned weapons, or just watched the world go by. Their composure was indeed remarkable. So you got that bit right, I think. Friday the 12th of April, more survey work Ap Sui Nay today, and this time some action. Shots were fired. All Australian troops carried out ambush drills immediately and managed to stop just in time to avoid killing 3 Vietnamese in Army of Republic of Vietnam, that South Vietnam uniform, presumably genuine ARVN soldiers, shooting birds. This goes on all the time, but every now and then an ARVN soldier turns out to be Viet Cong in disguise. 2 Australian warrant officers were killed near here only 3 months ago by Viet Cong in ARVN uniforms. Saturday 13th of April 1968, more survey work at Ap Sui Nay and more action. An ARVN versus Viet Cong clash occurred beside the survey party, and the air and undergrowth were thick with machine gun fire for a short while. Grenade launchers were also used. Results of the action in terms of casualties to either side was not known. However, it was frighteningly close to our party. And I must admit, I understand that at times very small groups of only a couple of people went out to areas that I would like to have gone without a section of infantry around me. After World War II, projects commenced in Indonesia and expanded over 25 years to include the Solomon Islands, Fiji, Tonga, Kiribati, Nauru, Tuvalu, Vanuatu and Western Samoa. And technical advisors were posted to national survey and mapping organisations in Fiji, Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. Now I think if we get to the nub of this, the conditions that often our survey people had to contend with were quite different in many respects because of the isolation and because of the small number of people that were involved. And they often deployed for long periods, sometimes up to 5 months, to establish ground control. They were often very isolated. They camped in tents or out in the open with stretchers and mosquito nets to keep out not only the mozzies but flies, sandflies and any number of other creepy crawlies, not to mention buffalo and crocodiles. Not that the mosquito net would have done much good there, I suppose. Rations were generally tinned and there was little fresh food, and it could be difficult to resupply these outposts due to weather or breakdowns. Usually positioned in the field by helicopter or vehicle where possible. Helicopter lifts were usually carried out in 4 lifts. Firstly the party leader, then the tech equipment, then the camp equipment, and then finally the second member. One loads the chopper and the other unloads at the other end. They often operated from very restricted LZs and on slopes, which led to rotor and tail strikes, which is never good for choppers. Usually took rifles, live ammunition during these isolated operations, but they weren't allowed to do so when they were operating in Indonesia, being armed only with a machete. Add to this snake bites, spider, ant and scorpion bites, burns, lifting injuries, personal medical issues, and little protection from the elements, and it gives some degree of the conditions that they endured. In some areas, the risk of cholera, typhoid and malaria were also an issue. The isolation also created family issues due to lack of communications. 3 examples being a warrant officer's son being blinded in one eye in an accident at school, a corporal's sister's fiancé being killed in a gas explosion in Brisbane, and another corporal's son dying from an accidental overdose of his mother's medication. So you can imagine how that would have affected those soldiers being isolated and out of communications at that time. I'm also aware that Leon Griffiths here had paused to reflect on life after having been picked up by a chopper and flying into a severe storm with virtually zero visibility and running the risk of either running out of fuel or the possibility of crashing into a hill if they'd missed the airstrip by even a small margin. Fortunately, they spotted the lights of a vehicle sent out onto the runway to guide them in, but it could have been possibly another name on the list. The life of members of the Royal Australian Survey Corps mapping in these remote areas was stressful due to the time constraints. It involved long hours, the constant moving of these field parties, the rough living conditions and a very demanding environment, often with no support in close proximity. It could be very dangerous and required people with initiative, people who are able to think on their feet. I understand that the mapping parts of Australia at this time were largely a civilian task. However, the Army was used in the most remote areas as it was considered that they were set up to operate in such conditions and that they didn't get paid overtime. As most people here today would no doubt know, the Corps was disbanded on the 1st of July 1996 and absorbed back into the Royal Australian Engineers. But I'd have to say that I agree with the comments by the author of the official history of the Royal Australian Survey Corps as part of the Australian Army History Series, when he states that Australians as a whole might still be blissfully unaware and hence unappreciative of the debt of gratitude owed by two generations of surveyors who have helped make possible the enviable standard of living generally enjoyed across this country. Should that situation ever change and the story receive the wider recognition that it deserves, then the part within that tale occupied by military mapmakers is worth special acclaim by a grateful nation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and for those snippets and anecdotes along the way as well. And Leon, got to watch those helicopters, mate. Yes, right. My pleasure to introduce our last speaker now. It's the President of the Corps Association, Mr. Fred Brown, RFD.
Thank you, Wayne. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you along here today, and I'd like to express a special welcome to our distinguished guests. Thank you for taking the time on this Sunday morning to come along. It's really great to see so many people here today to witness this recognition ceremony. When I look around the room, I can see many people who would have served with 2 or 3 of the members that we are remembering today. I can also see many faces here that probably haven't looked at each other for more than the last 30 years. And we will be looking at each other a bit more closely later on today, I hope. The idea to recognise the service of these fine men came through the death of Major Peter Crabb in November 2014. Peter was serving in the eastern states and returned to Perth to attend a 60th birthday of a mutual friend. He got up on a Saturday morning, went for a run, and he suffered a heart attack. Peter had done more than his fair share of serving on active service, but as he died in Australia, there is no formal recognition for him, even though he died while still serving. Whether one serves on active service or not depends mainly on which unit you belong to and whether or not that unit gets posted overseas to an operational area. If it does, you go with it and you serve on active service. If it does not, you stay home and you serve at home. If you have your heart attack and die, if you do it on active service, it's recognised. If you do it here, it's not. So there is an element of luck or chance to the benefits and recognition that families and these members get after they die. Following some discussions with the Crabb family over some time, the idea was put to the committee of our association that we would have some form of recognition for these members who die while serving, whether they are or are not on active service. Of course, our main interest is in the members that belong to our corps, the Royal Australian Survey Corps, and we also went for a West Australian connection because we're a Western Australian organisation. And shortly you will be able to see permanent items in the form of an honour roll in this room, and you look at all these fine honour rolls around the room. Well, these 9 men will now have their own. And after that's unveiled, we'll go outside to a sundial obelisk, which was put here in 1996 by the Survey Corps Association to commemorate the units that served in Western Australia, and now the men that served with it and aren't with us. I feel you'll be impressed with what you see. We were lucky we found a spot, and you'll see it in a couple of minutes when we unveil the honour roll. To bring this project to fruition, of course, there are expenses, and so I'd now like to formally acknowledge and thank the donors. The major donors, of which there are 3, gave very generously indeed, with Mr Kerry Stokes via Australian Capital Equity providing a large proportion of the total cost. The RSLWA and the Ex Fortuna Association, based in Bendigo, it's a Survey Corps association, also gave extremely generously. We do have represented one of those organisations here today. Lieutenant Colonel James McMahon is here representing Kerry Stokes of Australian Capital Equity. So thank you, Lieutenant Colonel McMahon, for coming along today, and thank you for your contribution. Other lesser but still significant donations came from Mr Colin and Mrs Marianne Cuskelly from Bendigo, and many people here would know them. They were related to Peter at one stage, and also Ray White Real Estate from Narrogin. Quite a few people made smaller donations, and I'd just like to thank all of those people. I'd also like to express my admiration and appreciation for the committee members of our association. They have worked tirelessly in such a diligent and capable manner to make these permanent forms of recognition here ready for this service today. In fact, talking about the finances, several of the committee members of our association approached me on the quiet and said, Fred, if we don't have enough money, let me know and I'll put some in. So this function was going to go, but nonetheless, we still appreciate greatly the donations from the people who donated. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge and welcome home to WA Nicholas Avino, son of Sergeant Leo Avino, who we're recognising today. Nicholas is currently serving over East, and I would like to also thank Alan Rosso. I think there's a lot of people here today who've probably come along just to see Alan. He's come back from Tasmania and he's here with us today. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming, and I hope to see quite a few of you at the Trade Winds after this service finishes. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fred. And look, it's just wonderful to know that so many people have travelled so far to be here today. It shows you what a significant occasion is for the Corps and how they respond to being former members of that fine Corps. It's now part of our event to now acknowledge the memorial board or honour board that we have in this particular room. As Fred said, these names now join men and women from a number of conflicts from long ago, and this is the right place for them. And this room here is used quite regularly for a lot of events, and so it's not something that's just going to be shut away and lost in a corner and go to dust, I can assure you. So now, and with the help of Michael Venn and Leon Griffiths helping me, we're going to, well, we have the privilege, of course, to acknowledge these names individually. Fred Brown was saying to me, though, he does want to mention that there are some members who we'll talk about today where very little information has been available, sadly, but that might be rectified in the future through fellowship and people coming forward, which is welcomed. Others we have a lot more detail on. So please understand that, and we appreciate your understanding and tolerance in that regard. All right, so first of all, I called Leon Griffiths to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. The first member on the list is Sergeant Pantaleo Avino. Sergeant Avino was known by everyone who worked with him as Leo, and to his close friends and family as Punch. He was born on the 2nd of September 1957 and died at a young age on 28th of February 1992. He was survived by his wife Leanne and two small children, Nicholas and Ashley. Sergeant Avino joined the ARES troop of Fifield Survey Squadron on the 20th November 1982. Most members of the Corps had civilian qualifications, either in cartography or surveying, and they quickly assimilated into their duties and obtained military skills as part of their training. At the time, Sergeant Avino had commenced a Bachelor of Surveying course at Waite, now Curtin University. He quickly progressed to the rank of sergeant and had been detached to the regular unit for a period of full-time service in the Northwest on survey operations in 1989. With the reserve troop, he was fully involved in survey and mapping tasks throughout WA and had completed all his military training commitments. Leo undertook all his training and duties at the troop with a high degree of competency. He was extremely well liked and was always around with a smile and ready to crack a joke. I am sure he will be missed and remembered by many. It is perhaps a measure of his influence and love for the Army that his son, who is here today, has served in the Army Reserve for 11 years, which has included 3 tours of Afghanistan. He still loves the Army life. We wish him and the family well for the future.
Frederick Walter Bangay. Frederick was born on Boxing Day, 26th of December 1893. His enlistment date for World War II was the 20th of August 1940, and he died on the 22nd of February 1941. Michael, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to talk about Rodney Evan Beaches. Now, Rodney Evan Beaches was born in February 1952 and enlisted into the Army in February 1970. He was probably a Kapooka about the same time I was, but of course I didn't know him then. After his basic survey course at Bonegilla, he was posted here to Western Command Field Survey Unit, where I was serving here as well. Now, Rodney Evan Beaches was well known to some of the people here today. Was affectionately known as Bim. Don't know why, but it was Bim Beaches. Now, I wasn't only just a work colleague of Bim, but a good friend, and got to know his fiancée and then future wife, Patricia. Bim was promoted to corporal in February 1973, and that was when we were at Karrakatta at 5 Field Survey Squadron. Now, that was in February 73. Later that year, in December 73, Bim, myself and his wife Patricia all decided to travel to Victoria, home for Christmas, in the front of Bim's ute, the three of us. It wasn't until we got the other side of Norseman on day one that there were so many kangaroos we had to stop, wait till sunrise, and just sort of had to kill a few hours in the front of the ute. That was very interesting. Now, Bim was a very keen sportsman and a cricketer as well. And unfortunately, unexpectedly in February 1975, Bim died of a brain aneurysm. So it was quite unexpected, and left his wife Patricia. Now, because Bim was well respected here or at 5 Field Survey Squadron at Karrakatta, the squadron decided to have a memory board named after him, the Beaches Memorial Trophy. There was an annual cricket match. I think it was the officers versus the ORs. I don't remember who won. But the Memorial Trophy, the first game was played later that year that Bim died. He was only 22, and to the best and fairest of the cricket match. And to the best of my knowledge, that trophy is in the Army Museum over East. So that was Bim Beaches. Thanks.
The next member on our list is Major Peter John Crabb. Peter was born on the 14th of October 1962 and died on the 15th of November 2014. Peter started his army career with the A-Res troop, with a lot of people that are here today, in Perth on the 11th of July 1962 as a sapper. A sapper, for people who don't know, is the go-getter person that does everything. On the 1st of September 1990, he served a long and distinguished career with the regular army. He served in numerous postings attached to 1 Topo Survey Squadron, Army Survey Regiment, School of Survey, Army Headquarters and Royal Military College. He spent some time in the Defence Material Organisation before elements of the Corps were integrated into the RA Engineers, where he served in the Combat Engineers and also Headquarters Forces Command. He spent time in Antarctica at Mawson Base in 1991-92. That was the summer, not the winter. Peter has been awarded the Iraq and Afghanistan Active Service Medals and Long Service and Campaign Medals, including the NATO Assistant Medal and the US Meritorious Medal. He was well qualified for his role with 2 master's degrees along with other qualification. I recall Peter as being quiet and unassuming person intent on his task. He related very well to his peers and enjoyed his time with the troop. Following this, and after reading many reports written by his colleagues, they expressed the opinion that he was a hard worker, unflappable, competent and reliable. Above all this, he was considered to be compassionate, warm-hearted and unpretentious. I'm aware that his family is very proud of Peter, and I'm sure that there are many here today who will remember him fondly. I trust it will be a memorable day.
Lionel Bill Sprengler. Bill Sprengler was born on the 11th of March 1920 at Armidale, Victoria. He enlisted in the 2nd AIF on the 10th of June 1940 at Caulfield. He served with the 2nd 1st Australian Army Topo Survey Company in Palestine and New Guinea and as an NCO administrator. He was commissioned late in World War II and transferred to the interim army post-World War II and then the Australian Regular Army. Bill Springer was promoted to captain in 1950. In 1954-55 was posted as an Australian Exchange Officer with the Royal Engineers Survey in UK. On promotion to Major in 1956, he was posted as Commanding Officer, Western Command Field Survey Section. This was considered rather interesting as Bill Springer was an administrator and not a surveyor. During this posting, Bill Springer was awarded the MBE for introducing the use of helicopters in the field control part of the mapping process. He was posted to Director of Survey around 1964 and later in 1966 promoted to Lieutenant Colonel as Assistant Director of Survey. He was then made CO of Army Headquarters Survey Regiment around late 1968 or early 1969. And Lieutenant Colonel Bill Springer was a conscientious Army officer and a socially charming man with a warm and engaging personality. He was widely regarded as one of the very best officers in the Survey Corps, and he was the first Survey Corps officer chosen for the newly created exchange posting to the UK as a captain in the early 1950s. Sadly, Lieutenant Colonel Springer died in December 1970, aged only 50, while still the commanding officer of Army Headquarters Survey Regiment. He was survived by his wife Anne and 2 daughters. Michael?
Thank you. Paul Thomas Collins. Paul was born in November 1956 in Papua New Guinea. Now, the reason he was born in New Guinea is his father was serving in the Royal Australian Air Force, so there's a real connection there to the military. In May 1976, he enlisted into the Army, and after finishing his basic survey course in January 1977 was posted to 5 Field Survey Squadron here at Karrakatta. Now, all we know about Paul was that he was tallish, quiet and a good cricketer. And I have no doubt that Paul probably played in the annual cricket match, the squadron cricket match, and don't know whether he won the Beaches Memorial Trophy that year, but at least he would have paid. Unfortunately, Paul died unexpectedly in February 1978. So.
Corporal Robert James Caswell. Robert enlisted on the 1st of July 1958 at the age of 18, and after a year in the eastern states he was posted to Western Command Field Survey Unit, was based here in these barracks. He passed away on the 14th September 1965 at a young age, leaving his wife Jean and their 3 young children, Denise, Ian and Diane. Sometime later, Denise wrote a letter to her father saying, "I remember you as a charismatic and yet sensitive soul." His friends in the unit recall him as a happy bloke with a perennial cheeky grin on his face. In the late 1950s and early 60s, Robert and his fellow surveyors were involved in surveying large parts of Western Australia, including the Gibson Desert. The work included field trips often lasting several months, which most of the big field trips were. They drove out of Perth on convoys on World War II vintage Studebaker trucks and Land Rovers. Wives were left to raise their children, and if they were old enough, get them to school every day. They looked after the house and took care of the myriad tasks which a family usually do together. The only communication Jean had with her husband was by a letter addressed to Corporal Caswell, care of Post Office Black Stump. Parties of generally 2 surveyors worked out from the base, some carrying out whatever surveying duties were required. They lived out of the back of a short wheelbase Land Rover, preparing meals from tin food carried in a wooden tucker box and cooked on a two gas burner stove or over an open fire. If they were lucky enough, they were able to chill a beer by putting it into water and spraying propane gas onto it. They slept on canvas stretchers, usually in the open, as the weather was also very cold, sometimes in the evenings, especially in the desert. You could say these men were privileged. They saw and worked in parts of our beautiful country that many of us will never see, but at what cost? Corporal Caswell's experience are varied and in some cases quite different from others, but it took the same hard work, effort and sacrifice to complete the task. We thank him for his service.
Kenneth Kinnear. He was born on the 26th of October 1958. His date of enlistment was the 27th of July 1977, and he died on the 15th of April 1979.
Lionel Christopher Markey. Now, Lionel was born in August 1888. Now, he enlisted for World War I, and he served as a corporal in the WA 10th Light Horse, serving at Gallipoli and in Egypt. Then in October 1940, he enlisted for World War II. Now, he was a member of the 1st Geodetic Section AHQ Survey Company, and he was involved in the establishment of the WA Coastal Triangulation Control Network, which was necessary for the emergency wartime mapping program. Unfortunately, Lionel died in April 1942 as a result of a traffic accident in Crawley, here in Perth.
That concludes the readings of our 9 former servicemen. I'd now like to invite Mr Josh Wilson, MP, Federal Member for Fremantle, to express thanks on behalf of the families.
Thank you, Captain Gardner, and good morning, everyone. I acknowledge all the distinguished guests who are here today, and of course that we gather here on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. I really only want to speak briefly to acknowledge on behalf of the families the work that has been done to create this permanent recognition of those who died in service as members of the Royal Australian Survey Corps. It's wonderful that can occur. It's due to the work of the Royal Australian Survey Corps Association Western Australia, the contribution of this museum, and of course the sponsors that were mentioned before. I know it's a form of commemoration that will mean a great deal to the families, and I want to acknowledge the servicemen and women and their families who are present here today. Fremantle is a place that has always valued its history and heritage. Our military history is one of the most significant threads in that heritage. I am constantly reminding people that this site, the Army Museum of Western Australia, is second only to the Australian War Memorial as a place that holds collections of military items and expresses sort of primary aspects, I guess, of our history and heritage. I'm very conscious that for 81 years the Royal Australian Survey Corps gave our armed forces the strategic planning capability and foresight to operate in difficult, unfamiliar and often dangerous circumstances. But I think it's also important that the broader community understand the wider contribution the Survey Corps made in peacetime. Its expertise was critical in the development of the Snowy Mountain hydroelectric project. I know that the Corps provided emergency mapping and guidance during the aftermath of Cyclone Tracy. Over those 81 years, the Royal Australian Survey Corps supported our forces overseas in 3 major 20th century conflicts. It made an enormous contribution to the mapping of Australia and other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And it's no exaggeration to say that it secured a reputation for setting the world standard as a technical mapping organisation. I think that's important that we remember. The permanent commemorative recognition that we install today will be very important for the families, but it will be important for the wider community. And when I speak to school children in particular, I was at Atwell College last week at their Anzac service. I remind young people that serving men and women and their families are spread throughout our communities, and we should look out for those people. I encourage students to identify and speak with and learn from and hear the stories of all those people who have served and who are serving. What we do today creates a new opportunity in relation to the Survey Corps to pay respect to those who have made a contribution to our peace and security, and more broadly, and to learn the lessons that their service provide to us, to learn that war is a terrible thing, it exacts a terrible price, and that peace should be valued and promoted and maintained with all our energy. So today we honour the Royal Australian Survey Corps and those members who died in service, and on behalf of the families, of course, I thank the Association, the Army Museum and the sponsors.
Thank you, Josh. Now, for the final part of the proceedings in this room, we're going to unveil the actual honour board that's on the wall. What first I'm going to ask is for Mrs. Jennifer Scott, the mother of Peter Crabb, and also Mrs. Leanne Smith, the widow of Leo Avino, to please move over to that particular honour board, please. There'll be an opportunity to see it a bit later on as we leave as well. But we're all standing now, so thank you. On that note, ladies, would you do the honours in now unveiling the honour board here at the Army Museum of WA? Get things underway for obvious reasons. So the Artillery Barracks was the home to the Royal Australian Survey Corps units for almost 20 years, from 1954 to 1972, prior to moving to Urban Barracks, Karrakatta. The sundial obelisk was constructed in 1996 when the Royal Australian Survey Corps was disbanded and all members of the Corps were transferred to the Royal Australian Engineers. I'd now like to call forward Mrs. Joan Maguire, the niece of Christopher Markey, and Ms. Denise O'Hara, the daughter of Robert Caswell, to come forward and unveil the memorial plaques on the obelisk today. Can we have an umbrella holder come forward, please, amongst you gentlemen? Thank you, ladies. If you'd just like to fold the banner back over this way, and we'll declare these memorial plaques unveiled. Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to call forward Senator Dean Smith and also the President Fred Brown to lay, inverted commas, the wreath. Gentlemen. We'll now have the last post with Mr. Leon Griffiths will recite the ode before reveille or rouse is played. The last post.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. Today's significant Royal Australian Survey Corps recognition ceremony is now concluded. Now there's no need though to rush off, as you may wish to stay for some photographs since incredibly the sun is out, so do take advantage of that. Here and also back inside where the honour board is. The Association also asks that former members who perhaps are of the Corps are present today, who may not be members of the Association, don't be strangers and do keep in touch. Everyone is invited to attend the Tradeswind Hotel just around the corner in Canning Highway between the two traffic bridges for a 12:30 lunch and refreshments. Please be aware though that the lunch and beverages will be at the attendees' expense. I wish you all well for a wonderful afternoon. I trust this ceremony becomes an important memory in your lives and your families' lives. And the Australian Army Museum, as part of Australian Army unit, our history unit, is extremely proud and privileged to have this Survey Corps representation here at our museum for years to come. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Test drive.